Hey everybody, I don't know why, but I thought I'd make a little educational video talking about the very basics of piano tuning, because I find it fascinating, and if you don't, then you might want to stop watching now if you've ever wondered about how tuners do their job. I will preface this by saying that I have only done 1 year of independent study, just kind of in my spare time as a graduate student at Iowa, and I in no way feel myself to be a qualified piano technician. I did work on a lot of pianos and tune them at that time because I really just wanted to learn how to do basic tuning on my own instruments. And what I discovered is that piano tuning is very difficult, and interestingly enough, a lot of piano tuners are not even musicians themselves. They've learned how to do this, but they don't necessarily know how to play. Of course, the better tuners are probably those who can get around a little bit on the instrument. But what we're staring at here, of course, is the underside of, the under the hood, really, of this Yamaha piano I just brought home. And what I found when I tested this morning against my trusty tuning fork over here, right here, of course, is that the piano, having not been tuned in, well, the seller said 4 years, I would guess it's probably been a little longer than that even, is that the entire piano is actually running flat to reference pitch. And let me show you what that means. Now, I've already tuned this A. This is actually what we call A220. This is A440, the A above middle C. So this A has already been roughly tuned in using that pitchfork to help me out. I'm not going to go through the whole long story of how that's done just yet. But if I play this A against the A below it, even a basic, I know nothing about music type, you can probably hear this note down here is quite flat compared to where I've set this A. Now, why this is an issue is because I know from my basic study of piano physics, or whatever you want to call it, that once I start raising the pitch of this instrument up so that all the keys are, where they're supposed to be, not 9 or 10 hertz flat, I'm going to encounter resistance from the piano because it's got an enormous amount of tension from these, 200 odd strings that are in the instrument. And as I tune some strings northward, other strings are going to try and go flat. So I'm going to have this kind of cat and mouse game where I tune up some keys, and then as I work my way downward or whatever, the other parts of the piano will go flat even if I've already tuned them. They're not going to stay in place. So it's going to take me probably 2 or 3 tunings before this thing is going to finally hold where it's supposed to. What you see in front of you here is my tuning hammer, and these are what's called, there's mutes. They're little wedges of rubber, and you use these in order to isolate strings, because of course in this register we have 3 strings per actual individual key, and I need to make sure that they are all more or less in tune with each other. So you start by taking this big felt strip. This is called a temperament strip, right? And you sort of insert this in your middle octave of the piano and use this to only adjust the middle strings. So I've adjusted all the middle strings between these 2 Fs. Now, that sounds horrific because I've only really tuned completely this lower fifth of the temperament octave. So I've already done the middle strings of this entire F to F, and then I went back and I've tuned the outer strings one by one against the middle string. Okay, so rephrasing that, right? I adjust the middle string of each of these keys and I isolate the outer 2. You go back after you've set all the middle strings, and then you adjust just the left string against the middle, then the right string against the middle. So let's see how that's done. Now, wrench technique, tuning hammer or tuning wrench technique is a topic unto itself, and that's something that was probably the hardest for me and still is. It's not something where you can just wrench it up, just straight like a piece of hardware. You have to finesse it because these pins, first of all, are flexible. They are steel pins and they tend to twist. They're also sticking into what's called the soundboard, and this is actually covered up by this felt on top. But in order to hold this amount of tension, these pins go several inches, well, not several inches, but an inch and a half or so deep into a piece of wood, and they are very tight because otherwise they would not hold tuning. So you have this kind of weird looking, it's going to look like I'm applying a lot of pressure to the wrench. I'm actually not at all. What I'm doing is kind of tick, 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 tick sort of gestures. You start to feel like you're having a seizure after a while trying to do this, but you're trying to just finesse the pin up, and you actually want to go with, every time you tune a string, you're trying to go a little north, sharp rather, of where you want it to go, okay? And then I use a key to, you'll hear me hit it really hard. Of course, if you ever heard a piano tuner in action, you know it's kind of annoying to listen to them work because they're smacking these keys. They're doing it for a reason, because when you tune this string northward, you know, sharp of where it wants to go, it's not going to stay put. So you hit the key associated with the string really hard in order to equalize the tension on the string and hopefully knock it back down to where it's actually supposed to be. So this is pretty cool stuff. Let me see, what do we have muted here? I think that's my E flat. I'm not sure why I'm working on that, because C4 was my last key that I tuned. So I'm going to take these mutes, and I've tuned, again, the middle string of this D flat here. Okay, you see the hammer hitting that set of strings. It, again, sounds terrible because the middle string's in tune, but I haven't tuned the outer strings just yet. Okay, so I'll move my wrench to the corresponding pin. This, of course, is also fun stuff. Okay, and I just slap it on there. By the way, never try to do this without a proper tuning hammer. Don't think you can do this with like a some sort of something you picked up at Aces. It's not going to fly. It's going to wreck your piano. So let's try this out. I can hear the beating is horrible and it sounds nasty. What I'm trying to do is bring the strings close enough together, and of course I'm adjusting the one that's out of tune, and I'm trying to bring them so that I know what's called beating, right? That's what sounds bad here, is that beating of the strings against each other. And I know already this string is flat, so I'm going to very carefully wrench, again, notch, 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 and you can already hear that sounds a lot better, but let's see if it stays in tune once I smack it. Now, if you're listening for what's called the beats, the wow, 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 wow that's going on between those two strings, you'll notice when I hit it harder, it actually became a faster beat rate. Okay, so I want there to be none of that beating ideally, and I'm going to need to re-wrench accordingly. Okay, so now that sounds almost perfect, but again, I haven't smacked the strings. If you listen very carefully, you can hear a very, very slow beating, which means they're just barely out of tune with each other. But I'm going to hit this thing one more time hard, and suddenly that beating becomes more pronounced. So this is why your piano tuner has to keep smacking the strings over and over to equalize this tension. So I've given another notch upward. Now it sounds like it's worse out of tune, but let's smack it. Okay, it's getting there. It may just be a matter of... Now I think it's too far sharp. Let's try again. I'll actually bend it back down just a little bit. Again, let's tick, tick, tick. Ah, that's worse. Okay. So it takes a little... You know, that's still not great. I can definitely hear about a beat per second, which is more than I'd ideally want if I was being paid to do this. But again, I know my piano's going to need to be retuned again, so I'm just going to leave it there. Now I'll take this little wedge that's blocking off the left string. Okay, so this guy, I'll remove it, and I'll flop it to the other side, and insert it, and then move my hammer to the top pin. So now I'm adjusting that string, and now again it's going to sound terrible, because that left string is still very flat. Okay, so tick, 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 tick. Okay, again, I'm not applying much pressure at all, I'm just trying to do it in these incremental steps. Like tremors almost. Okay, we're getting there. Tick, 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 tick. Okay, getting there. That sounds a lot better than it did. If you were listening carefully, you may have noticed when I smacked it that time, it actually fell pretty close into place. And now if I remove this wedge now, remember how bad this key sounded earlier. Okay, still not perfect. Again, I'm not going for total perfection, but man, is that so much better than it was, right? So you can hear these strings I've already, the keys I've already tuned all three strings on. Listen when I get past that D flat. You'll hear immediately. Woo! So you just keep on adjusting these until they all sound okay. Then you work your way out octave by octave. This is the hyper simplified version. But if you've ever kind of wondered how piano tuning works, this is a very, very basic introduction to how that sort of works out. The fundamental principle is you tune the middle strings, and then you go ahead and tune the outer strings, and these mutes are everything, plus your ear. And of course you can use a computer these days to help you out, but like everything else in music, it seems like unless you're going to learn the fundamentals, sort of doing it quote-unquote manually, you're never going to be good at doing it with a computer, which means you're just going to wreck your piano trying to do it without having some idea of how to do it by ear. There is, even with computer usage, the tuners that do use computers to help them out are still very picky, and they may override or make certain decisions based on what they hear in the piano. What's fascinating, actually, is that every piano is a little different, and you make decisions piano by piano. There's not one standard way to tune a piano exactly. Sometimes the computer can tell you its opinion, and other times you may decide that opinion is wrong after you've tuned 5,000 pianos in your lifetime or whatever. I know what sounds good when the thing's done. Screw you, computer. Okay, so I'll just keep on doing this for the next, it'll probably take me 3 or 4 hours, and then I'll go back and do it again when the whole thing goes out of tune. So, fun times. Aren't you glad you have a digital piano? I'll talk to you later.